Top diplomats from the US and China have met in person for the first time as trade tensions simmer between the world's largest economies. Marco Rubio and Wang Yi held talks on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting in Kuala Lumpur, where US tariffs had dominated discussions. Both parties calling the meeting constructive and positive. But Mr Rubio says there are some issues that still need to be worked through.
There's a lot of work to be done. No one's saying it's easy, but we do have some opportunities on some things we might be able to work on to begin to build some momentum in our relationship. I thought it was a very good meeting. I really felt encouraged by it. But look, there's work to be done.
And Mr Rubio also hinting at a possible meeting between the US president and his Chinese counterpart. And
the odds are high. I think both sides want to see it happen. Obviously, we have to build the right atmosphere and the right deliverables so that a visit isn't just a visit, but it actually has some takeaways from it that are concrete. But there's a strong desire on both sides to do it. The president wants to do it. The Chinese side wants to see it happen.
And for more on those talks, we have Jagruti Dave live from Washington, D.C. and Guan in Shanghai. Let's get to you first, Jagruti. Mr. Marco Rubio and Wang Yi both very positive about the talks that they have had. What did Mr. Rubio have to say specifically after his talks with Wang Yi, apart from what we have just heard?
Yes, Marco Rubio and Wang Yi spoke for about an hour, as you say, and they didn't really release anything beforehand. And even afterwards, I think Marco Rubio was pretty tight-lipped about the contents of their conversation, not really giving any details about those contentious tariffs that have roiled Asia and the world, with countries really worrying about what this means for their trade dynamic with the United States. So Marco Rubio, as you said, mentioned that it was a constructive and positive meeting, and he also raised the high odds of a meeting between Presidents Trump and the Chinese president as well, and that could be at an upcoming summit. The two leaders have had a phone call in the past, and lots of discussions between high-level diplomats and high-level officials that haven't really yielded a kind of breakthrough. And I think there is some sort of deliverable that I think from those comments by Marco Rubio that I think there is hope for, and that is the sense that the US is trying to build towards a meeting that has some kind of outcome, a tangible outcome at the end of it. Marco Rubio also talked about the positive last meeting in London between Chinese and American trade representatives. So I think the sense is that from Marco Rubio is that the conversation was about the points in which that the two sides could be constructive and build on something rather than some of the more contentious issues. Even in the statement by Tammy Bruce from the State Department, there was no real detail about tariffs, which clearly overshadowed both ASEAN and the meeting with Wang Yi. But really, the discussion was described as constructive and pragmatic, stressing the importance of keeping channels of communication open.
All right, Guan, we just heard Jagruti there. Marco Rubio putting a very positive gloss on these talks with Mr. Wang Yi. I feel really encouraged by it, he says. Has Beijing echoed those sentiments?
Well, it pretty much is quite similar to what she has said. Wang Yi pretty much emphasized that both sides should translate the important consensus reached by the heads of state into concrete actions and policies. Now, that's a standard boilerplate, statement by nearly all high-level Chinese officials as far as U.S. ties is concerned. It's a very typical way of Chinese officials, especially in the current administration, even those at the very top, in the way they deal with the U.S. by referring to the outcome of the most recent meeting President Xi Jinping had with the US president, be it President Biden or President Trump in this case. Now, it's a common way for China to nudge the US to follow through on what Beijing sees as agreed upon principles. And those principles are that both sides will manage differences through communication, expand cooperation, as well as keep their economic relations stable, healthy, and sustainable. Now, aside from referring to the Xi and Trump joint statement, Wang Yi also expressed hope that US would view China objectively, rationally, and pragmatically. He called on Washington to formulate its China policy with the goal of peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation, and to engage China in a spirit of equality, respect, and mutual benefit, so as to jointly find the right way for two countries to get along in the new era. Now, these remarks do echo those that he made earlier when he had a phone call with Rubio back in January.
All right, Guan, a meeting between the two leaders, so Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi, would essentially seal this positive sentiment. Has Beijing confirmed or said anything about any meeting between these two leaders?
Well, unlike the statement made by Rubio, as we heard earlier, as far as China is concerned, as far as what we are hearing here in China, we only have a short news flash, and according to that short statement that we have, there was no mention of the possible summit. But in that statement, Wang Yi did echo what Rubio said. Apparently, he said that both sides apparently agreed that the meeting was positive, pragmatic, and constructive. The statement also says that they will enhance dialogue, give full play to their diplomatic departments in advancing bilateral relations, and to explore expanding areas of cooperation while managing differences. There was no mention of any contentious issue like Taiwan or sanctions, or even if that is indeed the full picture, is significant because Marco Rubio has been one of the Washington's most hawkish voices on China, regularly calling for tough measures on China, be it for human rights in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, tech decoupling, and sanctions on Chinese companies. So it's unlikely that the summit would have a chance of taking place at all if those contentious issues was all that Rubio talked about. So at least these statements kind of tell us that perhaps, we do not know for sure, but at least they seem to be preparing the conditions for that would be conducive for the summit to take place. Wei Su?
All right, thanks for that, Guan. Jagruti, we just heard Guan there. So US-China might have found some common ground on the sidelines of this ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting. But insofar as Mr. Rubio would have had some things he wanted to achieve for himself with ASEAN at this meeting, is it too soon to judge whether he achieved these outcomes?
Yeah, I think it might be, because Marco Rubio had a very difficult task at ASEAN. He was basically trying to convince partners in Asia that the United States was a reliable partner, that the United States was still there for cooperation in the region. And all of this as Donald Trump is slapping some quite hefty tariffs on regional allies. So let's look at some of the figures. 25% on Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, 32% on Indonesia, 40% on Myanmar and Laos. So these are the sorts of duties that we're looking at. And with that, Marco Rubio has to go and convince Asia to do business with the United States. We've talked a lot about how Asian countries have often found themselves split in the middle between the United States and China as they play out their competition globally and in Asia. And both sides are really vying with Asian countries to persuade them that they are the most reliable trade partner. And obviously China's been ramping up its outreach in the wake of these tariffs. And Marco Rubio, therefore, had a very difficult challenge to try to convince Asian countries that the US was a stable partner. And so I don't know if necessarily Marco Rubio has achieved that particular goal, but he is there to maybe reassure, give some face time and reassure some of those concerns. Marco Rubio saying that he's had concerns from foreign ministers pretty much across the globe about these tariffs, and that the tariffs are really about rebalancing the United States' relationships with other countries. And so I think what we're going to see is perhaps more of this kind of outreach and perhaps more clarity if this summit between Presidents Trump and Xi does take place.
Thanks. Jagruti Dave reporting live from Washington, D.C. and Guan for us in Shanghai.